Baik, selamat sore Bapak Ibu semuanya. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Selamat datang saya sampaikan kepada seluruh hadirin di webinar hari ini yang akan membahas mengenai market outlook dengan topik Navigating the Market, Trends and Strategies for US Stocks. Persembahan dari CGS International Futures Indonesia. Bersama saya Selvy yang akan memandu acara ini hingga akhir acara nanti. Di sini saya juga ingin mengucapkan selamat datang kepada para pembicara kita hari ini, yaitu Ibu Selvy Tania, selaku Sales and Marketing PT CGS International Futures Indonesia, dan tamu pembicara kita, yaitu Jeddave Bank, Market Strategist CGS International Securities Singapore. Baik, sebelum kita memulai acara, mungkin kami ingin meminta kesediaan Bapak Ibu untuk peserta webinar hari ini untuk mengisi link absensi yang kami telah cantumkan di kolom chat. Nantinya data Bapak Ibu akan kami gunakan untuk lucky draw yang akan dijalankan di akhir sesi acara. So, jangan sampai lewatkan kesempatan ini. Baik, tanpa membuang waktu lama lagi, Bapak Ibu dan rekan-rekan sekalian, langsung saja untuk mengawali acara ini, mari kita dengarkan kata sambutan yang akan dibawakan oleh Ibu Selvy Tania, selaku Sales and Marketing PT CGS International Futures Indonesia. Kepada Ibu Selvy, kami persilakan.
Selamat siang, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Oke, saya mewakili PT CGSI Futures Indonesia mengucapkan terima kasih Bapak Ibu sekalian sudah meluangkan waktu untuk join ke webinar kita hari ini. Tentunya semoga harapan kami adalah melalui webinar ini Bapak Ibu sekalian mendapatkan pengetahuan tambahan mengenai US market dan peluang-peluang apa saja yang bisa Bapak Ibu dapatkan melalui market US ini gitu. Jadi boleh Bapak Ibu sekalian, boleh nanti apabila ada pertanyaan, nanti boleh di kolom chat atau ada sesi tanya jawab nanti di akhir yang apabila mungkin ada yang kurang dimengerti atau mungkin ada ingin yang ditanyakan, boleh tanyakan langsung. Ya, jadi harapan dari kami adalah melalui webinar ini Bapak Ibu sekalian menambah pengetahuan mengenai market US selain market Indonesia gitu. Oke, mungkin sekian dari saya. Saya kembalikan ke Ibu Selin.
Baik, Ibu Selvy, terima kasih banyak atas kata sambutannya. Baik, langsung saja sebelum kita masuk ke sesi utama, yaitu market outlook, di sini saya ingin mengajak Bapak Ibu semua untuk turut berpartisipasi di game kecil melalui Slido. Di Slido ini kami ingin mengetahui pendapat Bapak Ibu mengenai trading US stocks. Jadi Bapak Ibu silahkan scan barcode yang sudah kami tampilkan di layar atau klik link yang sudah kami cantumkan di kolom chat. Nah, nanti di situ Bapak Ibu bebas untuk mengutarakan pendapatnya apa saja yang nantinya juga akan langsung muncul di layar Bapak Ibu. Ya, di sini kami coba untuk share screen. Nah, di sini adalah pertanyaannya, apa pendapatmu mengenai trading US stocks? Jadi nanti Bapak Ibu bisa klik link yang sudah kami cantumkan di kolom chat atau scan QR yang ada di layar. Di situ Bapak Ibu bisa jawab apapun pendapat Bapak Ibu mengenai trading US stocks sebelum nanti kita masuk ke sesi utama. Silakan Bapak Ibu. Silakan untuk linknya itu sudah ada di kolom chat. Jadi nanti tinggal di copy paste, terus masuk ke browser untuk masukkan pendapat Bapak Ibu mengenai trading US stocks atau scan QR code yang ada yang sudah kami tampilkan di layar. Baik, di sini sudah ada dua jawaban yang masuk, yaitu pertama menarik dan juga alternatif market untuk trading. Baik, di sini saya ingin menyapa juga untuk Bapak Ibu yang baru saja join. Silakan untuk join game kecil kami ini untuk slido.com mengenai pendapat Bapak Ibu mengenai trading US stocks. Nah, di sini sudah beberapa respon yang sudah diberikan Bapak Ibu. Itu alternatif market untuk trading, bagus untuk hedging, menjanjikan. Penasaran dengan sistemnya? Mengerikan, oke, ada yang mengerikan. Menarik, famous, oke. Dan induk stok dunia. Oke, kami juga masih menunggu pendapat Bapak Ibu yang lain. Top brand, ya oke. Ada lagi yang lain Bapak Ibu, silakan. Diversifikasi portfolio, oke. Oke, mungkin di sini sudah banyak ya yang sudah memasukkan pendapatnya mengenai trading US stocks. Mungkin tidak usah kita buang waktu lagi, kita langsung masuk ke sesi utama, yaitu market outlook dengan topik navigating the market trends and strategies for US stocks. Nantinya market outlook ini nanti akan dibawakan oleh rekan kami Jeddave Bank selaku market strategist CGS International Securities Singapore. Hi Jeddave, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes,
Hello.
hi Jeddave, nice to meet you. So
Yes.
all states are yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, hi, good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. If I'm going too fast at any point of time, please feel free to just raise the hand on the Zoom so that I can slow down a little bit. Okay, I do have a tendency to talk a bit fast, so you do have to excuse me. English is my natural language, all right? So I'm just going to share my screen, going to show my slides. Again, if you have any questions or at any point of time, if I'm going too fast, please feel free to slow me down, okay? Okay, so right now I'm just going to begin with the market outlook, right? I'm just going to give a very, very quick overview, right? Just important disclaimers, just want to make sure you guys can take a quick look at it, all right? And I'm going to start talking a little bit about the macroeconomic situation in the US market, okay? So I think one of the biggest things that a lot of investors will be having their mind on in this year is actually going to be the rates scenario, right? So a lot of times when you're talking about interest rates now, we have been in a rate hike cycle, and now the market is looking out for when the Fed is going to cut rates. And when you're talking about when the Fed is going to cut rates, the expectations have completely shifted to being one rate cut in 2024, and that cut is expected to come in September. So there's going to be one FOMC interest rate decision that comes along next year, but no, not next year, sorry, next week. But next week's interest rate decision is likely to still stay the same. They will continue to keep rates at the same level, and they will only cut rates in the next meeting, which is in September. Okay. So this is the midpoint of the target range previously seen from the Fed at the FOMC meeting, right, in the previous round. And I think a lot of this, again, right, it showcases a very big shift in terms of the inverted comma hawkishness, right, which relates to how much the Fed is really thinking of cutting rates or, keeping rates steady or possibly even keeping rates higher than expected, right. And for now itself, the Fed is still more on the hawkish side, although recent data has actually supported more of a rate cut scenario, right? So I think the key points to continue to keep an eye on, right, when you talk about the Fed interest rates and everything else, which is something that I think the market will really be keying in on, right, given the upcoming news, right, is that the Fed's priority remains a 2% inflation target and, of course, maximum employment, right? And then, of course, the cuts remain very data dependent. So they are still looking ahead at all the data that could come out, and that could shift, right? Depending on how the data comes out, they might shift their stance. They might change the way that they are approaching rate cuts. Some of the some of the recent economic data that has just come by, right? When you talk about things like your CPI numbers, right? You can see that CPI actually in the last few weeks actually came in broadly below expectations, right? And because it came in below expectations, right, there was a lot of disinflation traction kind of rumored, which is why you saw that's why the market actually had this big rotation. That's why the market actually very, very generally moved towards expecting rates to be cut very, very quickly, right? So even though the PPI the next day actually showed a mild surprise to the upside, that actually was counter to the disinflation traction fuel, right? It actually flagged potentially higher or more potentially continuation of the inflation trend, right? the data was generally just shrugged off by the markets, right? The markets generally felt that the CPI numbers were more important, and I think that's what they continue to hold on to. So in the past week or so, Fed Chair Powell actually had given speeches, right? And in his speeches, they continue to highlight the general tightrope, right? Which exists between the need to cut rates soon, but the worry that cutting rates too early could lead to some negative consequences as well. So I think that's the tightrope that the Fed continues to juggle and balance. And I think this is something that the markets are going to really continue to key in on and keep a very firm eye on. So I think this chart literally just tells you one thing, right? And so if you want to take away anything from my presentation and sharing, right, I think just keep in mind that this year we also have an election cycle coming along, right? So the election cycle is going to create a lot of volatility. So when you talk about volatility for this period of time, right, you generally tend to see that July and August tends to net out positively. That means in July and August, we tend to see positive months in such election years. But in September and October, we tend to see pretty heavy weakness. So if you're going to take away anything, all right, I would say that just be wary and very watchful. Seasonality does not mean that it will 100% play out again. But seasonality points towards a high likelihood or high potential that, this is actually a scenario that might actually continue, right? So September and October weakness is flagged. You just will want to be very cautious and watchful of that, okay? But generally outside of that itself, this is one of the more interesting years because there's so much data that's coming out in this period of time, and there's so much news, so much information, so much volatility, right? So again, this is just for your info, but don't hold too closely to it. Just be wary of it and be watchful, okay? So to unpack recent earnings, right, when you talk about the Q2 earnings season, right, it actually generally came in very, very positive. And so valuations, while the SPX valuations are all generally above the 5-year and 10-year averages, right, the earnings growth has actually been very positive. And you must remember that the market is looking at a rate cut scenario. And so with rate cut scenario, it's expected to be a tailwind for earnings and everything else, which is why you see a lot of stocks actually doing better, right? And so but in general, right, even though stocks have generally been recovering a little bit more, you talk about rate cut scenario and so on, there have been some companies that have really driven earnings a lot more than the others, right? And so your four are really highlighted, and some of the names are here below, right, in this chart, which is Amazon, Google, Meta, and Nvidia, right? And you can see that in this chart, right, it showcases that these four companies alone account for, a huge chunk of the earnings growth that we have actually seen in the market. And so the takeaway is that, the mega cap growth and the mega cap trade from the Magnificent Seven, or that's the 7 stocks that I will talk about later as well, right, are actually going to be very, very important, right? These are the names that, in terms of what the markets look at, these are the names that are very, very key. These are the names that investors all want to pay attention to, and for good reason, because they have a high cap weightage and they can impact the market very, very largely with their earnings. So when you look ahead to Q3 earnings, right, there are some sectors that are projected to do a lot better than others, right? And I think generally sector rotation-wise, right, you are going to see names like, your communication services and your information technology. These are two of the biggest sectors in the market, and these are the two sectors that are among the top performing sectors. If this kind of earnings does play out in this way, right, the general likelihood is that the market will continue to have some upside. So I think this is something you want to be watchful of, right, as earnings continue to go along. And generally, when you see so far, when you talk about the Q2, right, when you can see that many companies actually report expectations, their earnings actually come in line with expectations, or in fact above expectations. So again, all these charts do point towards one thing: earnings are pretty strong, and so that is part of the tailwind to the market. But again, that is not the be all and all. So just be very watchful for some of these things upcoming. So for Q3 itself, again, right, you continue to see a very, very big flag in terms of your technology sector. That is one of the sectors in which the earnings are expected to really be driven. And so if technology performs well, given that technology's weightage in the S&P 500 is about 50%, right? In all likelihood, it can continue to pull the markets higher. So I think this is just some information for you to pay attention to. Okay. So now that I've covered some of the slides, right, I'm just going to quickly move over to charts, right? And I'm going to talk through a lot of the charts, right? And these charts are going to point out, some of the key things you need to pay attention to, maybe some key levels. And of course, I think some key names that you want to watch out for, all right? So to start, right, I'm going to share a little bit about the inflation and the interest rate chart. So you remember I talked a little bit in the slides, right? I talked a little bit about the rate cut expectations, right? And I talked about disinflation traction. What do I mean by disinflation traction? So the Fed's preferred gauge for disinflation or inflation watch, right, is essentially this PCE price index, which is the chart we see below here. Okay. And when we look at this chart below here, you can see that this red line is the Fed's newest predictions on where they hope inflation to be. And as long as we are in line with this red line, right, or generally in line with this red line, the Fed will see inflation as generally in control, and the Fed will more likely than not cut rates. Okay? So when you look at rate cut scenarios, you can see that I have already put in the chart, right, on the red line, the Fed is only expecting one rate cut in 2024 and 3 rate cuts, which is going to be more steep next year, which could really be a tailwind for the markets, right? Because rate cuts will generally affect earnings positively and will affect valuations in a positive light. Okay? But when you look at your PCE price index, this is the one that markets are going to pay very close attention to because they are going to report the next round of inflation data actually later this week. So this is going to be something that you really want to pay attention to on Friday, right? Because on Friday itself, when the PCE index comes out again, right, with their latest round of data, you really want to be clear whether, it's going to be in line with or, above expectations, below expectations. It really could move the markets, all right? So as long as we keep along this traction of this inflation, right, you look at these lines that are drawn, as long as it keeps within these lines, in all likelihood, the rate cut scenarios could continue to play out, and we could see this positively impact the markets. Now, I'm just going to quickly move over to the S&P 500. This is the preferred gauge that, when you talk about the US market in general, this is normally the index that most investors like to look at. Why? Because this comprises of 500 S&P 500 is 500 names of the US market. That's a lot, and it's generally quite wide in terms of its coverage. That's why a lot of investors look at S&P 500 as the general gauge of how the US market is doing. And when you see the US market, you see SPX in general now, you can see that it still maintains a very, very clear upside trajectory, right? It has been climbing from October lows, right? And it continues to flag upside because you're not breaking down from some of these uptrend lines that has been formed. You're still keeping some of these uptrend lines. So the main levels that I really want to watch out for the S&P 500, the first point is actually going to be this initial support level around this 38% extension level, right? So this level near this prior swing lows, it's going to be the first bound I'm going to look out for. If it's any further weakness from there, I'm going to watch this gap support. Why? Because this gap support potentially is a measuring gap, right? And sorry, I think I went out of the video, right? Okay, you can see me again, right? Okay, so generally, when you talk about this gap here, right, this looks like a measuring gap. And what I mean by measuring gap, this is a technical pattern, right, that could see upside for S&P 500 from here upwards towards the next bound of resistance around this 60% extension level, okay? So for this pattern to play out, you will need to see SPX continue its uptrend. If it starts to break below some of these support levels, right, and I think generally if it breaks below this gap support here, right, which is right around this level of 5,400 to about 5,380, right, that could point towards a lot of further weakness. But as long as it holds above this initial level of this gap support, right, it could continue to point towards upside for the S&P 500 towards this 60% extension level. Okay, so I think pay attention to the S&P 500. To me, I still see the picture of upside continuing. I still see the path of least resistance pointing higher. Okay, so I think outside of that itself, I think this chart, all you need to know about it is normally when you are in the green, it is a positive. This is a breadth measure. What I mean by breadth measure is that it looks at generally when you look at the S&P 500 of all the names in the S&P 500, right? When more of them are doing better or doing positively, you tend to see the McCollum oscillator, which is this indicator here in the green, right? And so this is something that is positive, right? You see that McCollum oscillator has moved back to the green and is pretty positively steering in the green. As long as it stays in the green, I think you're still looking at some degree of short-term upside continuing to be flat. Now, I think the point where I was talking about just now, where there was a bit of a rotation, I mentioned that very, very briefly, right? And what I mean by rotation is that when you see in the past, when you talk about over the past year or so, right? Or just year to date, right? Year to date itself, you can see that this is a mess of lines, but let me explain what these lines tell you. So the top two lines over here, right, actually refers to your two sectors that have been outperforming the S&P 500. Right? So these are relative strength lines. And what I mean by relative strength line is that it is the sector of the technology sector in comparison with your S&P 500, right? And so what these lines will tell you is that if your line is above zero, it means that the sector is performing better than the S&P 500. If your line is below zero, right, it's below 0%, that means the sector is performing worse than S&P 500. So when you look at it on a whole year basis so far, what I'm trying to tell you is that there's only two sectors that has performed better than S&P 500. And those two sectors are your technology sector and your communication services sector, which is again the two major sectors where all your big names are at, right? Your Google, your Apple, your Microsoft, all these names are within these two sectors. So that is why the market so far has been led by these two sectors. But if I'm going to just compress the chart only to July, you'll see something interesting happening, right? So when you look at only July, right, you will see that the top two sectors or the top few sectors are actually not your technology sector and your communication services sector, right? Your top sectors are actually more of your financials and your real estate, right? And this is what I mean by there is a bit of a rotation taking place in the market right now. Your sectors that have been doing well over the past year so far are actually moving lower and showing weakness. Meanwhile, you're seeing some of the other sectors begin to perform better, right? And so clear examples of this would include like your top three sectors here, your consumer discretionary, your financials, and your real estate, okay? So this is all I want to really talk about in terms of your sector rotation. I think just be wary, there is a bit of a rotation taking place. So it does not mean that now you buy your big names will definitely do well. Not guarantee, but at the same time, you can say that the earnings has really been driven so far by your big names. So could it continue to lead the market higher? Potentially, okay? So to talk about these sectors in a bit more detail, right? I'm going to talk about them one by one, right? So your three growth sectors that are very, very important to look at are your consumer discretionary, your communication services, and your technology. And I will touch on them, each of them one by one, pretty quickly, but I just want to cover them all right? So you talk about your communication services, you can see that it is above your 50-day moving average, still keeping a very, very clear uptrend line, right? And so very clearly still flagging upside and it's still in a positive territory, but you are seeing that it's testing a first bound of support that could potentially flag weakness. And so that is the area you want to be watchful of, especially since Google or Alphabet recently reported earnings and it is not doing very well on the post market, just to let you know. How about your how about your consumer discretionary? Well, same thing, right? You have seen some upside, but you see also recent weakness, right? And this recent weakness is not yet at the level in which I'll be worried about it. So the upside still continues, but with Tesla's weakness today, right, we might see some weakness downwards towards the next round of support that I really want to be watchful of, which is this $185 level for consumer discretionary. Okay? How about technology? Technology-wise, you can see that it's holding right around your 50-day moving average as well, right? So the main takeaway I'm trying to tell you is that your growth sectors, yes, they have started to underperform recently, but they are still technical trend-wise looking pretty all right. They are not bad yet. So despite the rotation taking place, right, it might be short-term. You might start to see some of these mega cap sectors return in strength later on. Just be watchful of that, all right? How about some of the better performing sectors, right? As in the recent rotation period. Financials, right? Very, very strong recently, right? But you will notice that it has recently broke into a new all-time high, and you're holding prior support levels. So financials is a very, very strong looking chart as well. Very, very nice looking chart and continues to flag upside. True. But will it continue to outperform your mega cap sectors? Question mark. That's the part where I will caution, right? It is not always going to be the case. All right. But financials has continued to flag upside and continues to show a strong trend. So financials continue to look very strong. How about real estate? Real estate wise, you're still seeing it kind of trade in a sideways pattern. And what I mean by that is you are nowhere near your all-time highs, right? Your weakness from your January 2022 has been downward towards your October 2023. And from there itself, we have yet to eclipse the first round of resistance, which is going to be around this 4190 level. Okay? So you want to be very watchful of this 4190 level. You want to be watchful to make sure that it breaks above this level before you consider potentially looking more at real estate. Because if it keeps under this level, right, what it only can signal is that it could potentially just be a trade up to resistance and a resumption of downside. But rate cuts are going to come in, right? So that's the other picture of the pie. So the fundamental view is rate cuts, when it comes in, real estate will be one of the sectors that definitely benefits from it, right? But how quickly will it benefit? And remember that the market is forward-looking, right? So I think the first rate cut, when it does come in, and if and when it does come in, will likely impact real estate positively. Now, how much will it impact? I think that is going to be the point where I will want to see it first break above this 4190 level. Once it does that, then I think I would potentially be a bit more bullish on real estate. Lastly, I will want to talk a little bit about for the bigger picture, right? Before I cover more companies, I want to touch on the Russell 2000. So Russell 2000, very, very quickly, I just want to say that it has broken out from a sideways pattern. So it was like your real estate, right? Held down by your clear resistance levels around this 2130. But you can see in the later part of the month so far, you have seen it has completely broke above the major resistance levels and it started to show upside. So Russell 2000 is a small cap index. That means all your smaller names in the country, right? It is your companies that are between your 2 billion and 10 billion range, right? When your Russell 2000 is doing well, what it does tend to signal is that, the market and the economy is in a bit of a better place, right? And so Russell 2000 improving like that is a pretty positive sign. I think something that you want to be watchful of, because if Russell 2000 continues to improve, right, in good times or in more bullish markets, your Russell 2000 tends to outperform your S&P 500. And why, you ask? Because smaller companies can grow more, right? Got more room to grow. Your bigger companies, lesser room to grow. So it tends to be that in a better economy, your Russell 2000 tends to outperform your S&P 500. So just be very watchful on this as an index, and of course on some of the smaller company names, because they could start to rotate higher soon. Now, if you pay attention to the recent market news, right, over the past week or so, you realize that on Friday there was a very, very big tech outage, right? While the market was screaming about it, there was so much bad news about it. And some of you guys might even have been impacted by the outage, right? Because this outage impacted 8.5 million devices, Microsoft devices, right? And so when you talk about that outage and how many devices impacted, the company behind this outage was actually this company called CrowdStrike, okay? And so when you look at this company itself, you can see that it has suffered heavy weakness in the light of this event, because it's a very, very bad move, right? You talk about this outage and everything else, right? And so this outage sees this CrowdStrike actually move below some of its prior support levels, right? It's broken below, it gapped down below its 200-day moving average, and it's even testing below this uptrend line. This potentially signals a change in trend and potential further weakness for CrowdStrike. But I don't think it shifts the long-term prospects of CrowdStrike. I have a report on this that we wrote a while back. If you're interested, you can ask from your clients, but your reps. But just to note, it's all in English. So I'm so sorry, I cannot give you a translation of that. All right. But CrowdStrike generally still could potentially be a good long-term play. So despite some short-term weakness, I think you could potentially look towards entering for longer term. Not now, but eventually, just to be watchful of something like CrowdStrike, all right? How about some recent earnings, right? Just yesterday, right? Google reported earnings, right? And you can see that after Google reported earnings, it actually moved weaker in the post-market, right? So it had initial strength that saw it rally upward towards this 187, 188 level, but it gave up those gains, and in the post-market, it moved down towards this 179 level. Now, if you can see my chart, right, 179 breaks the 50-day moving average, but it's right around the bound of prior swing lows, and it's right around the bound of the prior resistance levels as well. So if Google manages to hold on to this prior swing low and support levels, and we see some upside from there, the likelihood is that Google keeps a very, very nice uptrend intact. If you see further weakness from Google, right, it still has this very, very nice uptrend line that still continues to be maintained. And so the upside still continues to be flat. But it could have some short-term potential weaknesses. So just be watchful for Google for short-term weakness, but the general take is longer term. Google could still be a good firm to look at. Okay? And I think earnings itself actually came in very positive. So it's not blockbuster in the sense that it's not amazing, right? It's not market-breaking earnings. But earnings were actually above expectations and generally very positive. So that's a good thing, right? How about Tesla? Tesla's earnings actually came in weaker than expected, right? So a lot of people were talking about, Tesla, they had a very, very nice upside recently, but it continued to consolidate around this resistance level. Now you're seeing potentially a break back below this major resistance levels and back towards the prior support levels, right? So if this downside does continue and play out, right, you could see Tesla actually resume a bit of downside. But in the midterm, or short or midterm, right, you are still seeing it kind of keep a bit of an uptrend line. And I think that's the first line. This kind of will be the first bound I will want to really pay attention to, alongside your initial support around this 220 level. Okay? But generally speaking, Tesla's itself, because it delivered a bit on top line but misses some of these expectations, margins are still pretty okay at 18%, right? You generally will still see Tesla as a bit of a company that is struggling. It's not full out in the upside. And the only time it will rotate fully to upside is if it can break above this 263 level, 62 level, right? Which is where we traded right up to in the recent rally, but continue to find resistance. Until we move above that resistance levels, Tesla still continues to flag some degree of, short-term weakness, consolidation, what have you, right? Not moving to upside yet. How about other names? Okay, Visa also reported earnings, right? But their earnings for first time in a long while, they actually missed their revenue expectations, and that's why you saw weakness in Visa. And this sees Visa continue a bit of a short-term pattern of downside, right? It continues to form this lower highs, lower lows, and when you continue in this type of weakness, the potential trend points lower, right? And so with it trading and kind of breaking the 200-day moving average, my take is that Visa will likely retest count the support levels around this 50% retracement level, which is going to be around this $257 level. Okay, so I think watch out for further weakness for Visa. I think the longer term prospects for such a firm always remain quite strong because it's a very, very big company, very stable. Their earnings growth is still very, very solid, but their short-term weakness is still something you really want to be wary of. It could potentially play out into further weakness. How about General Motors, right? They also reported earnings, right? And General Motors actually report earnings actually below expectations, right? Oh, sorry, they actually General Motors, if I remember correctly, report above expectations. I think I was wrong there. General Motors actually beat their expectations and they even raised their forecast. But there was a lot of potential reasons for the sell-off, right? And so some of the potential reasons were attributed to things like losses in China and the concern that, generally with companies like Tesla reporting earnings or reporting soon to report earnings, people are just not wanting to play into GM, right? Because GM is in the same industry as Tesla. If Tesla report earnings in a weak fashion, GM will probably in all likelihood be impacted as well, right? And so that is why you see some general weakness on the day for General Motors. But their earnings are very positive. So in all likelihood, General Motors will be able to continue its upside and continue its rally. You can see that its sell down also takes it right towards a 50-day moving average and right around the bound of prior resistance as well, which signals to me that as long as this bound holds, the potential for resumption of upside pretty strong. Lastly, I think for the earnings aspect, right? I think lastly is going to be Coca-Cola, right? So Coca-Cola actually raises their forecast, right? Because they were talking about how they expect their price increases to actually bear fruit in a positive light. But you can also generally see that Coca-Cola still faces a very clear resistance, or it has broken out from resistance, but it is not rallying or not continuing its upside from there, right? And it's still below the level of all-time highs, right? You see it's prior all-time high levels around $66.40, right? Coca-Cola still trades below that. And so the weakness in the short term potentially still remains intact. And you can see that it also failed to hold its upside for the day, despite the positive earnings and raised forecast, right? You still see selling towards the prior support level. So I think a few scenarios can play out. One, we hold this prior support level, there's a bit of a consolidation and trade along this sideway. And then there's a break in either direction, up or down. Second scenario is that we show some clear upside, we resume the upside from this break above this resistance zone, and we are going to retest the all-time highs. The last scenario is we break below, and we break below 50-day moving average. We retest the next bound with the next, we break below 50-day moving average, and we start to retest closer towards the next swing low, which is around $62 level. Okay? So I think just be very wary of some of these scenarios playing out. So when I mentioned things like the Magnificent Seven just now, right? Part of the Magnificent Seven, which is the 7 companies that have driven the markets higher in 2024, right? They include Google and Tesla. So outside Google and Tesla, what are the other names of the Magnificent Seven, right? You may ask yourself. So the other names are Apple, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, and Nvidia. And I'm just going to quickly touch on all 5 of these companies. They haven't reported earnings yet, but many of them are going to report earnings over the next few days and weeks. And that you will want to be very wary of or watch through of. So Apple is going to report earnings sometime towards the end of the month, in all likelihood. And when it does, I think what investors are looking out for is going to be continued resumption of strength in China, and whether the expectations on whether the device strength that is going to be led by AI and upgrade cycles will continue. If that really plays out in their earnings call, right, ahead of their release of their new iPhones, right, Apple could continue its upside in its rally because it's still keeping to some of these prior breakout levels. Support is still holding around there, right? Points towards the potential for upside resumption to still continue. The uptrend is very strong for Apple. Okay. Amazon-wise, meanwhile, I actually had a technical buy call on Amazon a while back, right? And so the technical buy call was right around here when it broke out, when it hit into a new all-time high. It hit my target price around the $200 level, but from there you see some weakness set in. Now it has not hit my stop loss price yet, right? But Amazon is one of the things you really want to be watchful of is whether it can hold some of these support levels. The next bound after this level around this 180 level will be this 176. And just below that will be this near the 200-day moving average around this 166. Okay. If it can hold this 200-day moving average, Amazon still keeps a general uptrend. Start to break some of these levels though, I think that's where you want to be worried about Amazon. Okay. But I think generally the path of least resistance for something like Amazon is still higher, still stronger. Meta platforms as well, very, very similar because I actually wrote a transporter pick, which is a positive buy call on Meta a while back, right? So I wrote it right when it broke above the 50-day moving average around this point here, which is the 5th of June. It actually rallied and hit my target price. My first target price is around the prior all-time highs, is around the $528 level, right? But from there, you also see some weakness, right? After that, it hit my target price, you see some general selling and weakness. It was about to test my stop loss, but it actually held just above my stop loss level. So the question for me to ask is whether Meta will continue its upside. I think one of the things I want to see from it, especially with earnings very, very soon for Meta, is actually next week. you will want to see Meta move above the 50-day moving average. And if it continues to hold near this bound, leading to earnings period, it could potentially signal positive earnings. And positive earnings normally signals potential further upside for something like Meta. So I think that's what you want to be really watchful of. Downside, meanwhile, you continue to watch for the 200-day moving average as well. Okay? Microsoft. Microsoft-wise, you can see resistance levels. It's held right around there, right? Support levels of the prior gap support and everything else held around there, held nearly, kind of held the 50-day moving average and continue to flag upside. So Microsoft is going to report earnings at the end of the month or so, right? And if it does report earnings, it's likely going to be positive. So with that being said, right, the caution is that I think Microsoft continues to be one of the names that will continue to be strongly driving AI growth and continue to show strength. Now, NVIDIA is one of the biggest names in the market, right? And one of the things that you want to see about NVIDIA is that you want to see it hold support. And for now, it does continue to flag that around the 50-day moving average. Continue to hold this level, and I think NVIDIA continues to show some signs of upside. Earnings is going to be one of the most keenly watched earnings for NVIDIA because NVIDIA is one of the firms that has rallied the most over the past over a year or so. Okay, a few 100%, right? So really just be watchful of NVIDIA. I think NVIDIA's earnings could be one to really watch out for because if it does underperform the very, very lofty expectations and goals that was held for NVIDIA, you will see general weakness. Lastly, I want to talk about two companies that's going to report earnings that you really want to be watchful of as well. This one is going to be within the next 1 week, right? So McDonald's is going to come in sometime next week, Tuesday, if I'm not wrong. And when McDonald's comes in next week, Tuesday, I think one of the things you really want to be watchful of is whether they can continue their rally, whether the upside will continue. For now itself, they flag a bottoming, right? Because you can see that there's a bullish divergence. Their momentum is moving higher, their price is moving lower. This is normally a trend for bullish divergence. It tends to flag short-term upside, right? And so I actually issued a technical buy call on McDonald's. Right now, though, however, McDonald's still face a bit of weakness after that technical buy call. But my general take is that McDonald's still has some degree of short-term upside to be had, right? I think the recent movement is more on market weakness rather than general weakness from McDonald's. So the level around the same McDonald's eclipse is this 260-250 level. If it can eclipse that, I think it definitely continues to flag upside in the short term. Lastly, AMD. AMD-wise is one of the competitors of NVIDIA and one of the competitors that has not been doing as well as NVIDIA, right? And so when you look at AMD, right, you can see that it's holding around the 200-day moving average, right? A very, very strong downside help support there. And with earnings very, very soon to come, if it continues to hold this 200-day moving average, it could potentially flag for the upside. But if it starts to break the 200-day moving average, especially after earnings, if it disappoints, right, we could see the resumption of downside towards this 78% extension level, retracement level. So just be very watchful of AMD. Okay. So I've covered very, very broadly some of the markets and of course some of the earnings releases and upcoming earnings releases as well that you want to pay attention to. I hope this has been a good presentation for you. I look forward to taking some of your questions later if there's any. But if not, thank you for listening. I hope I did not speak too fast. And yeah, I'll hand my time back over to my colleague. Thank you very much for listening.
Baik, I'd like to thank you to Jeddave for your comprehensive presentation. Saya yakin Bapak Ibu juga pasti banyak yang ingin bertanya. Untuk Bapak Ibu yang ingin mengajukan pertanyaan, silakan tulis pertanyaannya di kolom Q&A. Boleh dalam bahasa Indonesia, nanti kami akan bantu sampaikan ke pembicara dalam bahasa Inggris. Dan pertanyaan nanti Bapak Ibu akan kami bacakan di sesi Q&A nanti. Di sini juga saya ingin kembali mengingatkan Bapak Ibu kembali untuk mengisi link absensi, di mana linknya sudah kami tulis di kolom chat. Nantinya data Bapak Ibu akan kami gunakan untuk lucky draw yang akan dijalankan di akhir sesi acara. Bapak Ibu berkesempatan untuk memenangkan e-gift voucher dengan total Rp300.000 untuk 6 orang pemenang. Lucky draw akan kami laksanakan di akhir sesi webinar ini. Jadi jangan sampai kelewatan untuk kesempatan ini dan segera isi untuk link absensinya. Baik, selanjutnya mari kita dengarkan pemaparan mengenai how to start trading US stocks with CGS International Futures Indonesia yang akan dibawakan oleh Ibu Selvy Tania. Pada Ibu Selvy Tania, kami persilakan.
Terima kasih Bu Selin. Boleh slide presentasinya di-share. Saya selaku Wakil Pialang Berjangka untuk PT CGSI Futures Indonesia. Nah, ini saya akan mempresentasikan bagaimana cara memulai Bapak Ibu sekalian untuk bertransaksi saham US. Oke, next. Ini sekilas disclaimer dari kami. Oke, mungkin sebelum saya menjelaskan tentang bagaimana cara memulai untuk bertransaksi saham US, ini sekilas perkenalan dari kami, CGS International Futures Indonesia. Oke, kami sudah setup di Indonesia sejak tahun 2014. Oke, sejak saat itulah kami berfokus untuk mengedukasi para nasabah mengenai transaksi kontrak berjangka atau futures di Indonesia. Kami satu grup dengan CGSI International Securities Indonesia. Oke, next. Oke, next. Jadi melalui CGSI Futures Indonesia, Bapak Ibu sekalian selain bisa bertransaksi saham US, juga bisa bertransaksi untuk produk-produk lainnya seperti commodities, kemudian currency, index US stocks, kemudian ada interest rates juga ada dalam satu account yang sama. Next. Oke, kenapa CGSI Futures Indonesia? Jadi yang pertama pastinya kami menggunakan online trading platform. Untuk futures produk, kami menggunakan namanya CQG. Jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa install di online di mobile maupun di desktop dengan mengetik CQG. Tapi untuk saham US ini kami menggunakan iRest. Jadi nanti Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa install melalui mobile phone-nya Bapak Ibu sekalian. Nanti ketik aja CGS CFD untuk trading platform untuk bertransaksi saham US. Kemudian yang berikutnya kenapa melalui kami? Karena semua produk yang kami offering pada para nasabah ini direct market access, jadi benar-benar transaksi melalui bursa. Oke, jadi secara harga transparan, kemudian ada market depth di sana, ada bid offer, ada antrian dan lain sebagainya. Oke, dan juga kami berikan akses ke market global. Jadi selain ke bursa di Indonesia, ICDX atau JFX, juga dalam satu account yang sama, Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa bertransaksi langsung ke global exchange seperti SGX, CME, CBOT, NYMEX, COMEX, NYBOT, ICE, dan lain sebagainya. Next. Oke, ini adalah beberapa service yang Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa dapatkan ketika bertransaksi melalui kami. Next. Oke, ini adalah mungkin salah satu saham US yang bisa ditransaksikan melalui CGSI Futures Indonesia. Salah satunya mungkin yang bulan Juni kemarin menjadi incar-incaran banyak orang gitu, karena di bulan Juni kemarin itu mereka reach valuation-nya di 3,3 triliun US dollar, yang mana mereka melewati teknologi perusahaan lainnya seperti Google, Apple, Amazon, dan Microsoft. Kemudian dalam satu tahun, increase sekitar 178% untuk harganya. Oke, Nvidia ini sendiri adalah multinational technology company di Amerika, kemudian dia berdiri sejak tahun 1993 dari Jensen Huang. Oke. Nah, ini adalah beberapa tips untuk Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa bertransaksi trading saham US. Yang pertama tentunya harus memiliki tools. Tools itu maksudnya apa? Yang penting Bapak Ibu sekalian memiliki akun transaksi terlebih dahulu. Kemudian yang kedua adalah menargetkan, memilah-milah saham US mana yang kira-kira mungkin yang tadi sekilas Jeddave sudah sampaikan sektor-sektor mana saja yang kedepannya baik. Kemudian juga dari sana bisa dianalisa, kemudian dibaca-baca setiap informasi mengenai company tersebut. Kemudian juga setelah itu memiliki trading plan dan disiplin terhadap trading plan tersebut. Oke? Yang mana setting target profit berapa, kemudian yang paling penting adalah stop loss-nya. Oke, next. Nah, mungkin Bapak Ibu sekalian, mungkin ada yang aware dari tadi, mungkin kenapa dicantumkan CFD. Jadi sebenarnya saham US ini kita ditransaksikan melalui CFD mekanisme. Jadi dia adalah bentuknya derivatif gitu. Kemudian jadi ini memungkinkan para nasabah untuk melakukan spekulasi untuk saham-saham US, pergerakan harganya, tanpa memiliki saham yang underlying asetnya itu sendiri. Oke, jadi CFD ini memudahkan bagi para nasabah untuk bertransaksi saham US. Kemudian saat ini melalui CGSI Futures Indonesia, Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa bertransaksi sekitar lebih dari 600-an saham US dari Nasdaq dan NYSE dalam satu account yang sama. Yang mana untuk transaksi saham US melalui kami ini menggunakan mekanisme CFD, dia menggunakan sistem leverage. Jadi sekitar 10 times leverage-nya. Oke. Kemudian selain itu juga bisa transaksi dua arah. Bisa Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa trade long dulu atau short dulu. Nah, ini lebih fleksibel bagi para Bapak Ibu sekalian untuk bertransaksi. Tergantung marketnya itu sedang dalam kondisi bullish atau bearish. Oke? Next. Oke, ini adalah beberapa features dari CFD untuk saham US itu sendiri. Yang pertama, seperti yang disebutkan, transaksinya dua arah. Jadi tidak hanya bisa buy terlebih dahulu untuk buy position atau long position, tapi juga at the first, Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa placing short terlebih dahulu, tergantung dari kondisi market. Jadi lihat setelah peak stocks mana, kemudian dianalisa, kemudian jangan against market. Kalau marketnya lagi turun, jangan di-buy gitu. Jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa pasang sell terlebih dahulu, nanti ternyata analisa benar, marketnya going down, kemudian Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa buyback kembali di harga bawah. Oke? Demikian juga sebaliknya, kalau marketnya lagi bullish, tinggal beli terlebih dahulu, kemudian market going up, kemudian tinggal di sell di atas untuk sebagai close position-nya. Kemudian untuk ini juga dia menggunakan mekanisme hedging, jadi dia menggunakan margin. Oke? Marginnya dia adalah range-nya requirement-nya mungkin dari sekitar 10%, 20%, 30%, 50%, mungkin ada beberapa saham yang menggunakan marginnya 100%. Oke? Kemudian juga karena ini adalah market direct market access, jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian nanti di online trading platform dapat melihat transparent prices-nya di sana. Kemudian bisa lihat bid offer-nya, antriannya. Oke, tanpa campur tangan kami selaku broker. Kemudian juga untuk transaksi saham US ini dia tidak non-expiry date-nya. Jadi kapanpun Bapak Ibu sekalian mau hold position untuk saham US Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa. Oke? Yang penting adalah Bapak Ibu sekalian perlu maintain margin yang terdapat di equity Bapak Ibu sekalian. Next. Oke, berikutnya. Sebagai perbandingan terhadap mungkin traditional trading, mungkin Bapak Ibu sekalian berpengalaman di saham lokal, di saham melalui bursa efek di Indonesia. Nah, ini adalah beberapa perbedaannya adalah untuk saham US ini melalui CFD ini dia lebih simplified, jadi lebih sederhana dari settlement prosesnya. Jadi apabila Bapak Ibu sekalian kalau di saham lokal kan ada T plus, T plus, T plus gitu. Nah, kalau ini ketika Bapak Ibu sekalian open posisi buy, itu langsung akan menarik requirement marginnya dari equity Bapak Ibu sekalian. Dan ketika Bapak Ibu sekalian close posisi dengan mungkin di sell, jadi otomatis itu langsung profit dan loss akan langsung masuk ke equity Bapak Ibu sekalian tanpa menunggu berapa hari. Oke, jadi ini mensederhanakan prosesnya. Nah, kemudian apabila memang sudah dijual dan ada profit di sana dan Bapak Ibu sekalian mau tarik, nah, itu juga bisa langsung kita proses. Jadi selama ada access di account Bapak Ibu sekalian mau di withdraw, kita akan lihat, kita akan langsung proses gitu untuk withdrawal. Apabila withdrawal request itu kita terima di pagi hari, biasanya akan langsung ditransfer di hari yang sama. Apabila mungkin Bapak Ibu sekalian di sore hari gitu baru send ke kita, mungkin akan diproses di hari yang berikutnya. Oke, berikutnya. Nah, ini adalah sedikit sekilas-sekilas saja perbedaannya. Jadi untuk tentu saja bisa beli semuanya saham, baik itu untuk CFD, di cash equity pun bisa membeli saham, kemudian margin facility juga bisa membeli saham. Nah, ini yang membedakan adalah di CFD ini adalah dia bisa nge-short atau bisa pasang placing sell terlebih dahulu yang mana tidak bisa dilakukan di cash equity ataupun di margin. Oke. Kemudian juga instant settlement prosesnya, kemudian corporate action pun akan berlaku. Jadi apabila saham yang dimiliki oleh Bapak Ibu sekalian membagikan dividen, nah itu juga akan ke-reflect langsung ke account-nya Bapak Ibu sekalian. Nah, yang membedakan adalah CFD ini dia tidak memiliki voting right seperti yang dimiliki oleh cash equity maupun di margin. Oke, di mana semuanya sama-sama direct market access, kemudian order book-nya di sana tertera, kemudian ini yang mungkin sedikit membedakan dengan di cash equity, untuk CFD dan margin trading dia menggunakan leverage. Oke, dan kemudian yang perlu di take note adalah karena dia menggunakan margin, jadi mungkin dari setiap open posisi Bapak Ibu sekalian yang belum ditutup di hari yang sama, nanti mungkin ada sedikit financing atau interest yang berlaku ke charge di daily. Oke, next. Ini sebagai contoh untuk transaksi saham US. Jadi misalkan Bapak Ibu sekalian sudah membidik saham Nvidia mungkin saat itu, di mana bulan Juni kemarin dia hit di level tertingginya di sekitar 130-an sekian. Oke. Nah, mungkin di tahun lalu nih Bapak Ibu sekalian sudah bidik nih, kira-kira saham teknologi inilah yang bakal nanti ke depannya bagus gitu. Nah, kemudian ambil saham Nvidia, di mana tahun lalu di bid offernya di 50.12 dan di offernya di 50.13. Jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian memutuskan untuk buy 500 shares di harga 50.13. Jadi ini langsung hajar kanan. Ketika Bapak Ibu sekalian membeli 500 lembar saham Nvidia, jadi langsung akan ke charge komisi transaksi sebesar 50 US dollar. Oke, itu langsung akan mengurangi equity Bapak Ibu sekalian, di mana rate-nya untuk komisi transaksi adalah 0,1 per lembar saham. Oke, jadi 50 dolar ini didapat dari mana? 0,1 dikalikan 500 lembar saham yang Bapak Ibu sekalian ambil. Oke. Kemudian untuk Nvidia ini dia requirement-nya untuk margin rate-nya itu adalah sebesar 10%, hanya 10%. Jadi modal Bapak Ibu sekalian untuk mengambil saham Nvidia tidak perlu besar-besar, jadi hanya 10% aja dari total value Bapak Ibu sekalian untuk hold posisi. Jadi misalkan nih dari 500 lembar saham ini, misalkan saat itu Bapak Ibu sekalian ngambil di harga 50.13. Berarti kan sebenarnya value-nya itu sebesar 25.065. Tapi karena US stocks melalui CFD ini, Bapak Ibu sekalian tidak perlu menyediakan dana 25.000 sekian, tapi hanya sebesar 10%-nya saja sebesar 2.506. Sudah bisa keep posisi buy 500 lembar Nvidia. Oke? Nah, inilah yang dimaksud dengan memudahkan atau mungkin memaksimumkan dana yang Bapak Ibu sekalian miliki. Karena dia menggunakan leverage margin. Oke? Seandainya memang analisa Bapak Ibu sekalian benar dan kemudian profit. Oke? Harga naik ke 70.23. Tidak usah muluk-muluk sampai 130-an gitu. Mungkin di level 70-an Bapak Ibu sekalian mau buang posisi, close posisi. Nah, ketika sell posisi itu akan kecas lagi komisi transaksi 50 atas 500 lembar yang Bapak Ibu sekalian miliki. Kemudian dari pergerakan ini Bapak Ibu sekalian akan ada gross profit-nya 10.050. Jadi harga beli Bapak Ibu sekalian dikurangin harga jual di lembar saham yang dimiliki. Jadi dikurangin komisi, kemudian itu sekitar 9.950. Nanti dikurangin kalau misalkan Bapak Ibu sekalian hold posisi tersebut sampai berapa hari. Oke, nanti akan ada detailnya di report, daily report Bapak Ibu sekalian akan terima melalui email. Nah, sebaliknya apabila mungkin analisa Bapak Ibu sekalian mungkin meleset gitu. Jadi harganya tiba-tiba turun Nvidia di level 30.03, aslinya di 30.04 sehingga langsung di close posisi saja. Oke. Jadi untuk close posisi sell, jadi lihat di harga bid hajar kiri di 30.03. Dari ini ada gross loss-nya sekitar 10.050, kemudian ditambahkan komisinya Jadi ada sekitar net loss-nya sekitar 10.150. Plus overnight, tergantung Bapak Ibu sekalian hold posisi tersebut berapa hari. Oke? Mungkin sedikit gambaran supaya Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa ada gambaran bagaimana cara bertransaksi. Sebenarnya sama aja jual beli, cuma bedanya ini dia hanya bisa di short terlebih dahulu tergantung kondisi market. Oke? Next. Ini adalah platform kami. Jadi saat ini mobile version, Bapak Ibu sekalian bisa install di Google Play atau di App Store dengan search aja CGS CFD. Oke? Jadi bisa langsung nanti eksekusi di sana, bisa kelihatan tinggal search saja saham US yang Bapak Ibu sekalian minati. Kemudian langsung nanti tertera di sana marketnya, market depth-nya, bid offer-nya, antriannya di sana, ada chart-nya di sana, seperti itu. Oke, next. Ini tampilan-tampilannya, jadi ada buy atau sell, nanti bisa langsung tiket ordernya bisa langsung tereksekusi di sana. Berikutnya. Oke, mungkin ini sekilas apabila memang Bapak Ibu sekalian berminat untuk memulai transaksi saham US. Jadi yang pertama adalah tinggal fill out the form dengan melampirkan attach supporting document seperti KTP atau paspor buat foreigner, kemudian NPWP dan cover of bank book. Kemudian setelah itu, setelah dokumen lengkap, kami akan melakukan KYC. Kemudian setelah itu, Bapak Ibu sekalian sudah langsung initiate deposit, yaitu sebesar minimalnya 10 juta rupiah atau better dalam US dollar. Oke, setelah itu sudah bisa langsung transaksi. Untuk commission rate kami, per lembar sahamnya hanya 0,1 US dollar, yang mana kalau dikurskan mungkin tidak sampai 2.000 rupiah gitu. Tapi perlu di take note, jadi ada minimum 5 dolar per trade. Jadi kalau misalkan sekali transaksi hit tidak mencapai 5 dolar, pasti akan langsung ke charge 5 dolar. Oke, next. Ini adalah contoh daily statement yang mungkin nanti Bapak Ibu sekalian akan terima setiap harinya. Jadi ada komisi transaksi yang ke charge berapa, ada profit loss yang realized berapa, atau mungkin masih unrealized kalau masih ada open posisi yang dimiliki. Kemudian nanti apabila hold posisi selama berapa hari akan langsung terlihat di sana interest-nya berapa daily-nya. Kemudian di bawah itu adalah financial report-nya dalam bentuk US dollar, kemudian di base currency-kan dalam IDR menggunakan reference rate. Tapi tetap saja kalau Bapak Ibu sekalian top up dalam US dollar, dan Bapak Ibu sekalian tetap nanti di dalam US dollar. Oke, berikutnya. Oke, mungkin sekian dari Selvy. Jadi apabila mungkin ada yang mau bertanya kepada Jeddave, kemudian atau mungkin cara bertransaksi, boleh Selvy jawab. Saya serahkan kembali ke Bu Selin.
Terima kasih Ibu Selvy Tania atas pemaparannya. Seperti yang tadi sudah disampaikan oleh Ibu Selvy di presentasinya, untuk Bapak Ibu yang ingin memulai trading US stocks dapat langsung membuka rekeningnya hari ini dengan deposit awal hanya 10 juta rupiah saja. Menarik ya. Baik, sebelum masuk ke sesi Q&A, di sini saya ingin kembali mengingatkan Bapak Ibu untuk tidak lupa mengisi link absensi untuk join lucky draw yang akan kita jalankan di akhir sesi acara. Jadi nanti akan ada IG voucher senilai Rp300.000 untuk 6 pemenang. Langsung saja kita masuk ke sesi Q&A. Jadi jika Bapak Ibu ingin bertanya, silakan masukkan pertanyaannya di kolom Q&A. Mungkin ini saya langsung bacakan untuk pertanyaan pertama dari Ibu Neta. Maybe this question is addressed to Jeddave, ya. So, how do you see the impact of new technologies such as AI and machine learning and the US stock market? What advice do you have for investors who want to invest in companies that focus on sustainability? So, please, Jeddave.
Okay, sorry. So if I hear you correctly, so you're talking about first the impact of AI, right? And of course, you're talking about sustainability, right? I think that's the two main points. Okay. I think generally, okay, to point out first the impact on AI, lah, right? The AI is actually a very, very ongoing trend that, that I think for now itself, the market is very, very bullish on, but it is not yet something that has proven profitable, right? So even some of your bigger firms, like let's say, for example, just in your Google's earnings just yesterday night or yeah, today morning, right? Google's earnings actually showcase that while they are spending very, very big on AI, right? You're still not seeing the fruits of the labor yet. You're not seeing it result in profitability yet. And I think that is going to be an ongoing theme and question whether this AI spend or this AI race can actually lead to profitability. One thing is for certain, however, the companies that are benefiting from this move to AI is the semiconductor sectors and companies, right? So as long as you continue to see this push and this drive towards AI, the companies that are first going to be the most seeing the most tailwinds are actually going to be a lot of these semiconductor names, which is why Nvidia and AMD and so on are going to be names that are very, very, very closely looked at, right? I think that is going to answer the first part of the question now, right? So I think if you ask me in the back of AI, I would say look first and continue to keep a very close eye on the semiconductor names. I think those are the companies that will have the biggest outsized impact on AI. And then the next company that can then monetize AI and showcase that, it is possible to monetize it, right? I think that is where you're going to see a lot more of impact on the market. Okay. I think for the sustainability side, right, I am not very I don't pay a lot of attention to sustainability, to be very honest. So maybe not the best question that I can give you a very, very firm answer on. But my own take is if you look at for sustainability wise, if you're talking about you want names that are showing focusing on clean energy, you can focus on your EV names. Those are definitely names that, when you talk about sustainability, clean energy, these are names that are big, right? But of course, EV space is not the best as of now, right? Outside of that, like if you're talking about names that you want that are keeping within the sustainability ratios but are not exactly, talking about clean energy and what have you, I would say names like your financials, a lot of your banks and so on are definitely names that are not clean energy focused, but at the same time, their pollution indexes and everything else is quite low, right? So I mean, that's my limited understanding of sustainability. Yeah. Hope this answers the question. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next questions. Coming from Iin, what are the major trends you are seeing in the US stocks market currently? What factors do you think will most influence the US stock market in the next few months?
Okay, so the next few months, right, the biggest thing that's going to be in the minds of a lot of investors is actually going to be the election cycle. Because we all know that the US election is going to take place in September, right? So when you talk about the election cycle, right, I think there are two names that are already being floated now out, right? Because just over the weekend, last weekend, right, President Biden has actually stepped down from being in the race, right? And so he has been replaced by Kamala Harris, Vice President, right? And so now the race has shifted. Previously, there were a lot of expectations that President Trump will step into the White House again. That means he'll win the election. But with Kamala Harris now being the running opposition against Trump, the question mark is whether it will still be Trump. And the initial indications are not very, very clear, right? But the general bet is still that President Trump will be the elected one. And if that plays out, there is a potential for this inverted comma Trump trade. And what I mean by Trump trade is that people will actually look into things that, Trump will possibly want to focus on. He talked about things like, I want to drill, I want to create more supply. That could be a downside for things like energy sector, for example, if he starts stepping into the market, right? If he does go into win the election, right? Outside of that itself, Trump is very, very famously someone who wants to push the economy stronger, right? And so things like rate cuts and things like that will likely come in a bit sooner, or he'll try to push it for a bit more, right? And if that plays out again, right, definitely I think it will lead to a little bit more of a tailwind in the initial phase, especially for a lot of your smaller cap names and your general economy that will outperform your bigger names. So I think the big question mark now is the election now. I think that will be the one that a lot of investors are paying attention to. Of course, the other thing, of course, in a lot of investors' minds is the rate cut cycle, right? And of course, when you talk about rate cuts, right, the expectation is for September rate cuts. unless that changes, or unless we see very, very big news that changes that expectation, right, the rest of the year should be relatively quiet in the rate cut space. That means investors won't really be expecting a lot more because the Fed has already projected just one rate cut this year. So I think that's why my own take is generally the main thing to pay attention to really will be the election now. Yeah. So if the rate cut wise, the rotation of it will be the main thing, right? So again, that will focus more on your small caps and so on. Yeah.
Okay. So next questions from Pak Budiman. Hello, Jeddave. Bit interesting when talking about technology companies share in the US market. What are your thoughts about Grab Holding and Sea or Shopee as a few biggest decacorn in Southeast Asia, since their financial reports are still bleeding until now? So what's your opinion about this? Should we buy it now or just wait until their financial conditions are settled? Thanks.
Okay. For Grab and C wise, I'm going to share my screen a little bit, all right? Especially for the chart wise. I am not super familiar with their financials, so I haven't read into it very, very deeply, right? But my understanding is that we have a ongoing ad call on C to start, okay? So C Limited, there's an ongoing ad call. The target price actually, to my knowledge, is around the $88 mark, which is going to see some significant upside, right? If you're talking about hitting the target price, right? And this you will realize that this $88 level is right around a technical resistance level as well, which to me points out that there is some degree of potential that this actually plays out. My worry is, of course, the short-term weakness, right? So you have to look at it in a short-term, long-term kind of basis. If you are only looking at it for the short term, you have to be very watchful of something I see because volatility is very, very high, right? You are seeing some technical supports come in at the present moment, but still not very clear on the upside. And of course, your momentum is very weak, right? RSI has broken below 40. Generally, that is to me a not very positive sign, right? So my own take for something I see is that yes, earnings have potentially continued to be pretty strong, but C's rotation away from this idea of profitability and back into this growth phase, right, will be strongly helped if rate cuts start to come in. And I think these are going to be the things that will help to drive C into a new heights, right, or help it to at least reclaim some of this former ground, this $88 level. So I think foresee that will be a main thing I want to watch out for. So again, short term, long term, be very watchful of that. I would say short term, just be very careful. See, you will still want to watch for further weakness. Longer term prospects, however, C still looks like a company that could potentially hit some of its targets, especially given that it's still trading along a very nice uptrend line. Okay. Now I move on to Grab quickly, right? Hope my data quickly loads. If not, it's going to be a bit hard. Okay, I hope that this will load. It's not really loading. Okay, never mind. Grab wise, I'll just explain in a more verbal manner. I'm so sorry, I cannot get the chart to load. I think is my Wi-Fi now is a bit slow. So Grab wise, right, to explain a little bit further, if you look at it, if you do go and look back at the chart for yourself, right, my own understanding of Grab is that it's currently trading around support levels from what I've last seen, right? And so when you see Grab around your current support levels, right, again, the long-term, short-term kind of scenario again, the short-term weakness definitely is something that you want to be very watchful of. The thing about Grab is also that I think we have the ongoing buy call on Grab, right? And when you talk about that ongoing buy call on Grab, right, it is definitely pointing towards potential strength. Okay, wait, I need to get the chart back up. I'm just going to quickly share my screen now so you can see. Sorry, yeah. Okay, yeah, so to update, yeah, right. So you can see that Grab is around a pretty important support levels, correct? What I last said was right. So you can see that there's a general uptrend line that's intact for Grab, right? But the thing that you also want to see is that there's a very clear resistance level, especially around this 388 level. Now, the current target price that from what I remember that we have of Grab is around $4.30. Okay, that is above the kind of major resistance level, right? That's around this 388 level, right? So my take for Grab is that you want the number one hold current support levels, right? There's a confluence of support that's right around current price levels, which is around the 200-day moving average and uptrend line. You break this uptrend line, you break this 200-day moving average, I would say there is definitely some short-term support that could be tested again. That means further downside, short-term weakness. You hold this support, however, and I would say that the short-term prospects still remain pretty positive because you are seeing this uptrend line still intact. So Grab, I would say, is a bit more of a wait and see because currently it looks like it's at a pretty nice, affordable level. But again, you need to be worked through. Some firms like Grab, volatility tends to be a bit higher. So it's not going to be just nice upswing and right. You have to be prepared for weakness and short-term loss as well. Okay? I think that will be my answer on C and Grab. Hope it answers your question.
Okay, thank you. So next question from Pak Ardiansah. So, hi Jeddave, what are your thoughts about Tesla shares projections since the China EV vehicle is constantly attacking the EV market all around the world, especially here in Indonesia? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think for Tesla, right, I think I previously shared a little bit about the company. I didn't really talk a lot about the fundamentals, however. So my understanding about Tesla's fundamentals is that they have one of the best margins in the market. And I think that is something that a lot of the firms, Chinese firms especially, will find it hard to compete. Now, at the present moment, right, your Chinese EV firms are doing okay or in a sense better or competing very heavily with Tesla because there's a lot of support coming from the government. Now, this is what I mean by the Trump trade as well, because Trump has said that he wants to take a very much stronger stance against Chinese doing this sort of thing in the EV space, right? And so if it comes into the power, right, the likelihood is that there could be tariffs that comes into play against Chinese EV makers. And when those things come in, there will be some retaliation action taken by the Chinese government. Now, this is going to be a kind of a retaliatory kind of I raise prices here for your Chinese firm, so Chinese raise the prices of Tesla and the China market. That could be what eventually plays out. There will be a bit of a price war going on. But my general take is that Tesla is actually very well equipped to handle some of these wars and some of these margins when compared to many other EV firms. Because Tesla is actually one of the majorly profitable EV companies. And you cannot say the same for any other company or most other companies out there at the present moment when you're competing on profitability. Many of these other firms, right, they are not profitable yet, or they are only profitable in their normal oil and gas cars. They're not profitable in the EV sense, in the EV space. Okay. So generally, my projections of Tesla are still pretty positive because it is one of the firms where if you talk about earnings projection looking ahead, right, you are still seeing it as one of the firms that still has pretty strong margins and still has pretty strong growth potential, especially relative to other EV companies. Yeah, so I think that would be my take on Tesla. Hope it answers your question. Yeah.
So, selanjutnya ini ada pertanyaan dari Bapak Lung Prilianto Budiman. Apakah jika sudah punya user ID di CGS CIMB Securities, perlu buka akun lagi di CGS Securities? Jika tidak perlu, bagaimana menghubungkan akunnya? Maksud saya, apakah perlu buka akun lagi di CGS Futures? Mungkin dengan Ibu Selvy bisa dibantu untuk dijawab. Silakan, Bu.
Ya, terima kasih Pak untuk pertanyaannya. Jadi apabila memang Bapak sudah menjadi nasabah di CGSI Securities, jadi untuk bertransaksi saham US ini Bapak perlu membuka akun yang baru. Jadi nanti tinggal mengisi lagi, melengkapi lagi dokumen yang dibutuhkan, kemudian melampirkan fotokopi KTP, NPWP, dan cover buku tabungan. Kemudian nanti akunnya akan kami create yang baru gitu Pak, karena dia juga menggunakan online trading platform yang terpisah dari sekuritas. Oke. Kemudian untuk depositnya mungkin Bapak juga perlu menyetorkan kembali ke rekening untuk yang saham US ini. Oke, terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih Ibu Selvy untuk jawabannya. Langsung ke pertanyaan berikutnya, ini terakhir dari Bapak Agus Mashuri. So, what is the meaning of the horizontal lines around the prices of 44 and 31.75? Mungkin Jeddave bisa bantu untuk jawab.
Okay. sorry, I think I'll need to clarify in terms of the 44 and 30 something, right? Are you, number one, I think which chart are you talking about, right? I show a lot of charts, right? It might just be that if you're talking about maybe are you talking about, oh, actually I can't even think of what company you're talking about, though. Okay, if you're talking about horizontal lines, right, that means it's just flat straight lines like that, right? Generally, you talk, I will see that as support and resistance. Okay, so maybe one example that I'll give you is, let's say if I look back at Tesla, for example, right? If you're talking about these lines, for example, that I draw on the chart, I count them as support lines. If they are lines that are drawn above the current price level, they are resistance lines. That means they are lines that they have to go above, right, to conquer this resistance level before you can talk about the next price level, right? Support lines are lines that, let's say if Tesla does show weakness today, right, and it tests lower, I will want to see Tesla's price not break below 220, for example. If it break below 220, not a very positive sign, it could point towards further weakness, right? So I think generally that's what I mean by support resistance lines. I hope that's what you're talking about. If you are, I hope you answered your question.
Oke, thank you, Jeddave, for your answers. Mungkin itu saja untuk pertanyaan hari ini. Mungkin kita langsung saja untuk terus mendapatkan informasi mengenai US Market Update dari Jeddave. Mungkin Bapak Ibu langsung saja buka rekening di CGS International Futures Indonesia. Karena salah satu benefit menjadi nasabah CGS International Futures, Bapak Ibu tidak akan pernah ketinggalan update mengenai US Market setiap harinya. Jadi, jangan sampai lewatkan kesempatan ini. Baik, langsung saja kita masuk ke sesi yang paling kita tunggu, yaitu Lucky Draw. Bagi Bapak Ibu yang belum isi link absensinya, bisa langsung segera isi link absensinya, karena kita segera akan mulai untuk undi siapa yang akan menjadi pemenang Lucky Draw hari ini. Oke, sekarang kita akan tampilkan untuk Lucky Draw-nya. Oke, mungkin kita bisa klik 1, 2, 3. Oke, stop. Oke, selamat untuk Bapak Lung Priyanto Budiman yang berkesempatan untuk memenangkan voucher IG voucher sebesar Rp50.000. Untuk pemenang kedua, silakan. Untuk pemenang kedua, kami ucapkan selamat kepada Bapak atau Ibu Karsum Kusmadi. Untuk pemenang ketiga, selamat kepada Ibu Fitriani N yang berkesempatan untuk memenangkan voucher sebesar Rp50.000. Selanjutnya untuk pemenang yang keempat, kami ucapkan selamat kepada Bapak Andi Ramdhani yang memenangkan IG voucher sebesar Rp50.000. Langsung kita masuk ke pemenang kelima dan keenam. Untuk pemenang kelima itu jatuh kepada selamat kepada Bapak Solihin. Lalu masuk lagi ke pemenang terakhir. Untuk pemenang terakhir yang beruntung mendapatkan IG voucher sebesar Rp50.000. Untuk pemenang keenam itu, oke, selamat sekali lagi kepada Bapak Husni. Bapak Husni memenangkan IG voucher sebesar Rp50.000. Untuk keenam pemenang nantinya akan dihubungi oleh tim panitia untuk pengiriman hadiah gigi voucher sebesar Rp50.000 ke email masing-masing. Baik, terima kasih untuk kehadiran dan partisipasi Bapak Ibu semuanya di acara Market Outlook Navigating the Market Trends and Strategies for US Stocks. Dan juga saya juga ucapkan terima kasih kepada pembicara, baik Ibu Selvy, Tania, dan juga Jeddave. Terima kasih atas pemaparannya yang sangat-sangat komprehensif dan sangat jelas. Jangan lupa untuk ikut terus untuk Market Outlook atau webinar dari CGS International Futures Indonesia ke depannya, dan stay update. Terima kasih semuanya, selamat sore. Thank you. Bye.
Terima kasih.